It's considered a turning point for Hong Kong. China has passed a national security law that's set to tighten its grip on the semi-autonomous region.
The legislation aims to prevent, curb, and punish acts of secession, subversion of state power, terrorist activities, and collusion with foreign or external forces to endanger national security.
While details have yet to be published, the law's heaviest penalty could be life imprisonment. It's a response to more than a year of often violent anti-government demonstrations. Officials in Beijing and Hong Kong argue the legislation only targets troublemakers and won't affect Hong Kong's rights and freedoms or investor interests.
The legislation will not undermine one country, two systems, and Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. Hong Kong is a free and diversified society, but the one country principle is non-negotiable, as without one country, two systems will stand on shaky ground, and Hong Kong's stability and prosperity will be at risk.
Western governments, however, aren't convinced. The European Union believes the law will damage the independence of Hong Kong's judiciary and jeopardize the territory's role as a global financial hub.
We have indeed consistently said that China would risk very negative consequences if it went ahead with this law, including for business confidence, China's reputation, public perception in Hong Kong and internationally.
And the US, which is already at loggerheads with China over trade, has ended its preferential treatment of Hong Kong. This will halt defense exports to the city and limit its access to high-tech goods. That's triggered warnings of retaliation from Beijing.
Threats and intimidation will never work on China. The attempt of the U.S. side to stop China from advancing Hong Kong's national security legislation through so-called sanctions will never succeed. In response to the relevant wrong acts of the United States, China will take necessary countermeasures to firmly uphold its national interests.
In Hong Kong, reactions couldn't have been more mixed. Beijing supporters have welcomed the law, but protesters fear it will crush its rights and freedoms for good. Opposition leader Joshua Wong disbanded his Demosisto party, fearing it would be targeted under the new law. Still, they say they won't capitulate. The legislation could get an early test, with activists planning to defy a police ban to rally on Wednesday's anniversary of Hong Kong's 1997 handover to China. Sibel Karkus, TRT World.
For more on this, Roderic Wye joins us now from London. He's an Associate Fellow at Chatham House's Asia Programme. Welcome back to Money Talks, Roderic. Now, the prominent anti-Beijing protester Joshua Wong says this new law effectively marks the end of Hong Kong that the world knew before. But we heard in the story there Hong Kong's Chief Executive Carrie Lam saying that the new law only reinforces the one country, two systems framework that's been in place since the handover in '97. Who do we believe here?
They have very different points of view. I mean, the fact is that this national security law, by any normal interpretation, is a complete antithesis to Hong Kong running its own affairs, because under China's own basic law, it was guaranteed that Hong Kong would enact such legislation on its own, and now it has been enacted for it by the People's Republic of China. So that is a serious blow, I think, to Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. It also undermines, and many of the provisions in the law undermine, the rule of law and judicial independence in Hong Kong.
Now, as we heard in that story as well, even before the Beijing law officially became the law of the land in Hong Kong on Tuesday, people like Joshua Wong disbanded their high-profile anti-Beijing groups. Do you believe that it already is having that deterrent effect against anti-Beijing protesters?
Well, it clearly is, and the protests aren't anti-Beijing; they're against the behaviours of the Hong Kong government and against the failure to introduce more democracy in Hong Kong. So it's not directed against Beijing per se. It's about the conditions in Hong Kong. I think he was sensible to disband this group, because I think it would have been an early target of this law.
So do you think this law, for now anyway, will see the end of the mass protests that we saw back in 2014 and even last year?
Well, we will see. As your reporter noted, there is a strong possibility of a demonstration tomorrow in protest at it. So I think, however, whatever happens in Hong Kong in the next few days, weeks and months, I think there is still be a strong groundswell of opinion within Hong Kong that they want the kind of things that the original demonstrators were demonstrating for, which is greater democracy in Hong Kong and greater transparency.
Now, world leaders from Europe and the US have condemned this new law. Washington has even moved to end its special trading relationship with Hong Kong. How might this new law hurt Hong Kong economically?
I think there will be some effect of the US action to essentially treat Hong Kong like a part of China rather than in a special way, which it had enjoyed hitherto. But I think overall, the effects of that kind of sanction are likely to be marginal. The greater danger, I think, for Hong Kong is not the immediate problem of sanctions, but the threat that this law and how it may or may not be implemented, the threat that that will pose to the rule of law in Hong Kong and, more importantly, to business confidence in Hong Kong, which needs an environment where the rule of law can be trusted.
Yes, now Beijing's ongoing encroachment of Hong Kong's autonomy over the years has really threatened Hong Kong's reputation as a global financial centre. It began with the 2014 umbrella movement protest and the widespread protests we saw last year, but its reputation as a financial centre has so far remained intact. Do you see this new law perhaps having more of a negative effect than the protests we've seen in the past?
I think it will be part of an ongoing and cumulative process that insidiously undermines business confidence in Hong Kong. This is not going to have any immediate large-scale effect on business in Hong Kong, but over the longer term, I think it may well do so. And I think it is a pity that a great pity that China decided to introduce this law because it was not necessary and not provided for in the basic law.
Okay, Roderic Wye from Chatham House in London, thank you so much again for joining us on the program.